Now you have nudge units embedded in governments or advising governments all around the world. And what they're really trying to do is change the will of the people from the top down. So governments are sneakily using pre-conscious, subliminal and covert techniques to make us model citizens, and maybe it's supposedly in our best interests, but we haven't been consulted upon it.
In this episode, I sit down with Laura Dodsworth, one of the first journalists to expose COVID-era government manipulation and how so-called nudge units used fear to change behavior.
I feel it, and I think I know a lot of people do. This feeling of something quite dark brewing socially and politically. There's a feeling of a net tightening and of truth being squashed, of more surveillance, more censorship, institutions captured by woke ideology.
We discuss the new book she co-authored, Free Your Mind, The New World of Manipulation and How to Resist It.
Your mind is wondrous. You do deserve to be sovereign of it, and you can be in charge of your own decision-making capability. You're not on a sliding scale with a piece of machinery at all.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Laura Dodsworth, so good to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you for having me.
Laura, some years ago now, you brought to the attention of the world the existence of these nudge units in the UK government and how they were actually seeding fear into the populace to affect behavioral change. You were ahead of your time. Since that time, we've learned that this has been happening at a mass scale across all sorts of what I call legacy media in use, and that we're being bombarded by propaganda daily. Propaganda and censorship, two sides of the same coin. I just wanted to give kudos where they're due here before we start. Now you've come up with something astonishing, which is a book that explains how to try to inoculate yourself in a whole myriad of ways from this. Tell me about Free Your Mind.
Free Your Mind, The New World of Manipulation, How to Resist It, is very much my follow-on to my last book, which you've just been very kind about, A State of Fear. I've co-written this book with fabulous behavioural scientist, psychologist called Patrick Fagan. The idea behind the book is that we do live in quite a unique time. We are bombarded with information and propaganda. It will sound dramatic for people to hear it this way, but there's a war on for your mind. Your brain is a battlefield. One study in 2007 estimated that the human brain receives the equivalent of 174 newspapers worth of information every day. So that's the first thing, you're overwhelmed with information, and the human brain simply can't cope with it all. So what you do is you depend upon shortcuts, cognitive biases to make sense of the world. I don't think we really live in a democracy in the same way that we used to think that we do. Democracy is about enacting the will of the people. But now you have nudge units embedded in governments or advising governments all around the world. And what they're really trying to do is change the will of the people from the top down. Now, there's no democratic mandate for this. So governments are sneakily using pre-conscious, subliminal and covert techniques to change the way we behave, to make us model citizens, and maybe it's supposedly in our best interests, but we haven't been consulted upon it. There's a confluence of this kind of sophisticated psychology, nudging and behavioural insights combined with AI and social media platforms and big tech. And I think the world is changing in ways which we cannot begin to understand the ramifications of. So there are thousands of books that teach people how to use propaganda, nudging, persuasion and advertising. And I don't think until now that anyone has really tried to write a book that is a defence against the dark arts, that teaches people how to identify and resist the manipulation. And that's what Free Your Mind is about. Not everybody's going to want to resist the manipulation. Not everyone's going to agree that they're under the spell of so much manipulation. It takes quite a lot of humility to admit that this happens. When I wrote A State of Fear, for me that was such an epiphany that governments could weaponize our emotion and our fear against us to make us stay in our homes, to lock us up, to change all the normal rhythms and rituals of life. to make us follow the rules. Again, it's supposedly in our best interest, but life changed in a way that we never could have imagined before. And I realised I'd lost all of these essential freedoms, but I did have there was one domain that I could have freedom over if I wanted, and that was my mind. And so it set me on this path of trying to understand how we reclaim sovereignty of the mind.
Often they are nudges, but sometimes, they're extremely heavy-handed attempts. And I'm thinking about Google Gemini here. There was so much ideology embedded in the system, and now it's astonishing how heavy-handed that manipulation is in this case.
We're so lucky to have seen it. It's one of those moments when the curtain's drawn back. Do you remember all the furore in the media not that long ago, just several months ago, when we had big tech leaders and AI leaders and politicians telling us that AI could develop sentience, it could write religious tomes, rule the world, and it presented a threat to humanity that was at the level of nuclear weapons. It was an extinction level threat. I mean, I didn't agree with any of that. I can come on to telling you what I think the real threat is. In a nutshell, it's that AI can be sedimented with psychology and nudging. It's a brainwasher's dream, frankly. But the thing about AI is it doesn't have sentience. It doesn't really generate language. What it's doing is riding on the coattails of humanity's achievements. And you can't forget the humans. It's the humans that code it. So people like to think they're above ideological influence, that they can't be manipulated, that they're not brainwashed, that they're not brainwashers. But what we've seen with Google is the pure, unadulterated ideological bias of the programmers. They want to change the way we imagine the world.
And very transparently, I think in this case, and the thing that we've kind of increasingly been realizing, or I've been increasingly realizing over the last, 5-7 years, is that, almost every power structure in our societies, in our Western democracies today, is kind of filled with people that share this ideology or are ready to be on board with it as a way to success, I suppose.
You're absolutely right. I think it's everywhere. And I think it's something that so many of us can sense. It might even sound a little bit dramatic, but I feel it, and I think I know a lot of people do. This feeling of something quite dark brewing socially and politically. There's a feeling of a net tightening and of truth being squashed, of more surveillance, more censorship, institutions captured by woke ideology. And, the answer as to what's causing this, I don't have it. I don't really know. I think it's complex, it's multifactorial, but we can feel it. And what we can see is the foot soldiers of it. So they're the technocrats, they're the behavioural scientists, they're the people that are trying to change how we think. They want to get into your brain and change how you think. They want you to imagine the world in the same way as them. The Google AI is a fantastic example of it, but it's absolutely everywhere. The idea that we all had to wear masks, with no decent underlying scientific evidence that it would stop transmission of a virus, but they love the masks because they're signals. They're signals of danger. There's danger in the air. They made us walking billboards for danger. But also the fact that we were then compliant, we were conformists. They didn't like those odd ones out. We see it with climate change, this constant push that we must change our behaviour to avert some catastrophe in order to try to take us down a path they want us to go down. This desire to capture your brain and to make you think the right way as a woke citizen of some new, unpleasant, dystopic world. And this is what we need to fight against.
Laura, we're going to take a short break right now, and we'll be right back. And we're back with co-author of Free Your Mind, Laura Dodsworth. Well, Laura, there's different kinds of personality traits in our societies, and some people just kind of believe that others should think as they do, that they think the right way, and others should think that as they do. You don't want to give those people the levers of power, so to speak, right? Like that's kind of that's the corollary to that. I want to touch on something, before we get into thinking about how to inoculate ourselves, which is of course the substance of your book. And I have to say that, to me, every single chapter of this book is useful. I want to touch on this AI a little bit.
TV changed the world. The internet changed the world, and this is going to be another game changer. Aldous Huxley said in Brave New World Revisited that technology had disadvantaged the little man in favour of the big man. And he wrote that before the internet even existed. There's something called the picture superiority effect, which means that pictures affect us more emotionally. They're more persuasive than text, which would be why, if you want to consume information rationally, if you want to make the most wise decision for yourself, it's best to get it in writing. Read a newspaper without pictures would be the ideal way to not be manipulated when you consume the news. And of course, we're not doing that. We're scrolling through video very fast. If you imagine a world where we're wearing Apple Vision Pro, or you can create video just from text, the options for where this could go could be almost endless. What I'd find concerning is the exact kind of safety mechanisms they want to put in. The thing about these big tech platforms and social media and this new technology is it knows a lot about you. We stomp around with very heavy digital footprints. One study that's now, I think it's about a decade old, actually showed that from just 200 likes, Facebook knew you better than anyone except your spouse. Facebook could detect your sexuality. You can imagine a world where Facebook would know that a young teenager is gay before the teenager knows they're gay. And that's pretty old now. So you have a completely personalised digital footprint. And there's no such thing as a neutral platform online. It's increasingly personalised towards us. So not only does it know you, that means that it can predict you and it can shape your behaviour. You can imagine a world where we're all in separate little separate digital pictorial worlds that are awash with symbolism, affecting how we see the world, how we interact with it. It's not even really the real world. And I think that's really the threat that's posed by AI, more than this kind of nebulous idea that it's going to develop sentience and nuke us.
A case in point, I suppose, is some of this work that Dr. Robert Epstein has done, showing, for example, that based on just simply altering the order of the results in Google around, he created experiments where he was able to demonstrate that for people who are, for example, undecided on who they're going to vote for in a particular setup, you can actually manipulate them to pick somebody with very high probability without them being aware of the fact that they've been manipulated in the first place, simply by reordering the search results. So this is something that happens through something called ephemeral experiences, meaning that no one ever knows what you saw, and you don't even know what you saw actually, because you go to your next search and you've already been effectively programmed. If you were someone who was undecided on a topic, it's that easy. Never mind generative video that has subtle subliminal messages embedded within according to the biases or ideological views of the creator.
Yeah, I mean, it happens in a more blunt way already. So, for instance, if I search for knives on Google, I'll probably get something quite straightforward about Swiss Army knives or whittling or kitchen knives or something. But if I was black in a city and listened to drill music, it's quite conceivable already that I would be getting something about reducing knife crime. This kind of thing already happens, operated by government agencies. And again, it's supposedly in our best interests. It's not really very well understood. It could be that if you see a video about knife crime, it might make you more likely to buy a knife and commit a crime with it. Just like there are studies that show that if you put up no smoking signs, you might be more likely to smoke because it reminds you about your cravings. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Oh, I'm reminded of the Delhi Cobra effect. Do you know about this one, Jan?
Tell me about it, please.
It's an old example of nudging. Back in the British Raj, the British authorities wanted to deal with the appalling number of cobras. So they incentivised the citizens to bring in a dead cobra in return for an incentive, money. And to their delight, this scheme worked really well. The citizenry were bringing in piles of dead cobras and being rewarded handsomely for it. It turned out that the locals had been breeding cobras in exchange for money, and when the scheme ended, what happened was loads more cobras released into the wild. All of these schemes that are put in place already, and they're quite blunt, may be leading to unintended consequences, is my point, but it is going to become a lot more sophisticated. The thing about this confluence of AI, this video effect, the picture superiority effect, with search, and social media is that you'll be an increasingly personalised digital world that can be scaled up like never before. Scaled up to the whole world, basically. 83% of the world owns a smartphone now, and it can be sedimented with totally unique nudging based on you. I mean, if you think about, say, when they were trying to persuade everyone to get the COVID-19 vaccine during the pandemic, that started with nudges. You can learn a lot about the government's intentions from its gentle nudges, because they then proceed. It's the first tool in a deployment of policies that go through from a shove to a prod to a cattle prod. We were given stickers, in this country when you got your COVID-19 vaccine to make, to show your social conformity, your social proof that you're part of one big group of people that have had a vaccine, evidenced by your sticker. And then there were some other enticing incentives, such as raffle tickets or shopping vouchers for people that had the vaccine. And then there were some really weird incentives around the world, such as marijuana for vaccines in Washington state, and lap dances, and even brothel trips for vaccines in Austria. It got crazy. College education raffles in the States. Then you get through to mandates. Imagine a world where your Google search results, everything you see on social media, or some kind of like metaverse world around you is shaped exactly to your particular reasons for vaccine hesitancy. It's not a nudge anymore. A nudge should be a choice that you're able to make yourself. It's supposed to be choice architecture. You can choose one thing or another thing, but you won't really be aware what choice is put in front of you, and it's totally unique to you and based upon your psychological profile.
Laura, I can't help but think of, one of your chapters contains a beautiful phrase. Social media distancing is required here, I think.
Absolutely right. Gosh, we all know we could benefit from less social media time. I think there's a study that says that on average people think they pick up their phone 25 times a day, but it's up to 80 or 90 times a day. I really had to confront myself when writing this book that I'm quite addicted to social media. I put myself into an experiment where I went into a convent for 24 hours for a digital detox. Now, I'll confess something to you. It was actually supposed to be 2 days, but I decided I couldn't face it, and I made it 1 day, which says a lot. That did allow me to kind of step back just that 1 day, and it affected my social media consumption for another week or two, but then I got back to normal. So we do have a chapter called Social Media Distancing, which, while it seems to spell out an obvious message, which is that you can be manipulated on social media, it's designed to be sticky, it's designed to be addictive, and there are bots and there are trolls, and it runs on emotion, and you can receive personalised messaging to make you buy stuff. Really, the answer for a lot of people will just be to use it more mindfully rather than not use it at all. But there are all kinds of ways you can hack yourself. So while other people can nudge us, we can also nudge ourselves. And it's a technique that psychologists called pre-boosting, I think. So, you can hack your phone. There's the obvious ones like setting screen time limits or turning your notifications off. You can make your phone grayscale. That makes it a lot less enticing. So there are lots of things you can do to manage your own social media use as well.
But that also takes the will to do it, right? Because these things are inherently addictive. And this is actually one of the challenges. We manipulate people, and that is the perfectly moral, reasonable thing to do. And what happens, it's an arms race of manipulation.
You're absolutely right. I don't know how long this has been going on for. When I became really alive to it was COVID. And there are a lot of people that thought that all that fear-mongering and nudging and propaganda was the right thing to do, because otherwise people would be too irresponsible and stupid. They don't believe in the wisdom of crowds. They don't trust the individual to make the right decision for themselves or society. And the problem is, that's exactly how the nudgers think. So David Halpern is the head of the Behavioural Insights team, what's colloquially known as the Nudge Unit. And he was interviewed several months ago talking about his part in the COVID-19 pandemic for an interview that was happening around the COVID-19 inquiry. And he said that the use of fear was justified if people's brains were wrongly calibrated. And I remember that really struck me, because I thought, what an interesting word to use. Well, how interesting to talk about calibrating a brain. We don't normally talk about calibrating people, we talk about calibrating machinery. It's as though people are little units to be shuffled around the board. You know, I like to joke that we don't live in the age of misinformation, we live in the age of myth information, because people are totally open, and I'd say shameless and brazen about this nudging, about how it's good for us. I started at the beginning, I think, of the interview saying that there's no democratic mandate for it. And it's important to remind ourselves that when all this nudging started, when it became embedded into governments, the behavioural scientists themselves actually talked about the legitimacy of the government influencing the public this way. And these smart people are just as susceptible to brainwashing as anybody else. In fact, there are some studies that show that smart people are more brainwashable. I know everybody clever watching this will be thinking, no, not me. I'm too intelligent to fall for any sort of brainwashing technique. But it's not true. The thing is that smart people are better at justifying it. There's motivated reasoning. So if you are smart, you can intellectually justify an emotional position you hold. There's also the cultural mediation hypothesis. Smart people are very good at working out what sort of norms and ideologies and behaviours that they should adopt in order to fall in with the right crowd and do better in life. You know, this is like Rob Henderson's theory of luxury beliefs. We used to have material objects to indicate our social status, but it's increasingly become about the beliefs we hold, and they're pure luxuries. That's why you get people, kind of an elite class in metropolitan cities who believe such mad things as men can be women, or you can identify as a cat. These are not the preoccupations of the developing global south. So smart people are very good at taking on crazy ideas and justifying them because they've got the brains to do it.
Any final thoughts as we finish?
Learn to understand your biases. Again, we explain what the psychological biases are, and learn to understand yourself. You need to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. Stop haunting yourself and learn to be the first to speak up.
Well, Laura Dodsworth, it's such a pleasure to have you on again.
Thank you very much for having me, Jan.
Thank you all for joining Laura Dodsworth and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Janja Kelek.